The millionaire is shocked to see black woman and son kicked out by his mother-in-law. Sarah stood on the porch. Oakwood summer roses, a cruel joke in the face of it all. 15 years. Gone. David's secrets, Agnes's claws. The house felt like a prison. The will pressed against her palm, a twisted reminder. Harmony Foundation if she divorced. Her dad's last laugh? Then the Bentley purred to a stop. Charles Worthington III, millionaire, David's brother. She'd met him, what, twice? Holidays? He looked out of place. Like a hawk in a henhouse. Before she could even blink, Agnes exploded through the door, face like thunder. And then, bam, she shoved this young woman, African-American, holding a little boy, right onto the porch. "Get out! You're not welcome here!" Agnes screeched, voice sharp enough to shatter glass. Charles froze, his face pure shock. He knew her? "Mother, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" he roared, rushing to the woman, shielding her and the kid. He knew her. But how and what did this have to do with Sarah losing everything? This was getting weirder by the second. What secrets were bubbling under the surface of the Worthington family?
Ei, antes de continuarmos com essa história incrível, preciso te fazer um alerta importante. Muitos inscritos têm relatado que o YouTube removeu suas inscrições sem aviso. Dá só uma conferida rápida no botão vermelho aí embaixo, para garantir que você ainda está inscrito no canal. Não quero que você perca nenhum conteúdo exclusivo que vem por aí.
E já que você tá aí, deixa aquele like poderoso que me ajuda muito com o algoritmo. Ah, e me conta nos comentários, de qual cidade você tá assistindo? Adoro conhecer cada pessoa incrível que faz parte dessa comunidade. Sua participação faz toda a diferença. Vamos interagir. "Mother, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" he roared, rushing to the woman, shielding her and the kid. He knew her. But how? And what did this have to do with Sarah losing everything? This was getting weirder. By the second, what secrets were bubbling under the surface of the Worthington family? The woman, still cradling the boy, looked up at Charles, tears welling. "Charles, I didn't want this." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. The little boy clung to her, wide-eyed and scared. Agnes sputtered, "Don't you Charles him, you scheming?" But Charles wasn't listening. He turned to Sarah, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Sarah, I am so sorry you have to see this." "See what?" Sarah fought her. Head spinning. "Mother," Charles continued, his voice dangerously low, "explain yourself, now." Agnes straightened her back, a glint of defiance in her eyes. "I have nothing to explain. This woman is a gold digger. She's after the Worthington fortune, just like your brother's little divorcee over there." She pointed a gnarled finger at Sarah. The woman flinched. Charles's grip tightened on her arm. "That's enough," Charles barked. He turned to Sarah, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, this is complicated. Let me explain." But before he could say another word, the little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, tugged on Charles' pant leg. "Daddy," he lisped. Silence. You could have heard a pin drop on that perfectly manicured lawn. Sarah's breath hitched. "Daddy?" Agnes gasped, her face turning an alarming shade of purple. The woman's eyes widened, and she started shaking her head frantically. "No, sweetie, he's—" But the boy was insistent. "Daddy, Mommy said you were coming. Why is Grandma being mean?" Charles stood frozen, his jaw clenched. He looked from the boy to the woman, then to Sarah. His eyes filled with a pain that went deeper than anything she'd ever seen. Then he crumbled. He sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands. "Oh God," he groaned, his voice muffled. "What have I done?" Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The world tilted. Daddy? Charles Worthington III, the polished, impeccably dressed millionaire, was the father of this little boy? With this woman? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense anymore. Agnes, recovering her composure, let out a shrill laugh. Well, 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 look what we have here. Seems our little secret is out, Charles. Sarah stared at Charles, who was still kneeling, broken, on the porch. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with desperation. "Sarah," he whispered, "please, you don't understand." But Sarah didn't hear him. A new thought, a horrifying realization, slammed into her like a tidal wave. She remembered David's smug smile. The way he always seemed to know something she didn't. The Harmony Foundation. Her father's will. The divorce clause. It wasn't about David. It was about Charles. And this woman. And this little boy. Her father, he knew. He knew about this. This family. Sarah's head swam. She looked at the little boy again, then at the woman, then back at Charles, kneeling on the porch, his life imploding. And then she understood. It wasn't just a secret. It was a conspiracy, a carefully orchestrated plan that had been years in the making, and she was right in the middle of it. But why? What did they want from her? And what was the real connection between her father and the Worthington family? Suddenly, the roses didn't seem so cruel anymore. They seemed menacing. And just like that, the game changed. It wasn't about a divorce anymore. It was about survival. Sarah didn't hear him. A new thought, a horrifying realization, slammed into her like a tidal wave. She remembered David's smug smile, the way he always seemed to know something she didn't. The Harmony Foundation, her father's will, the divorce clause. It wasn't about David. It was about Charles, and this woman, and this little boy. Her father, he knew. He knew about this family. Sarah's head swam. She looked at the little boy again, then at the woman, then back at Charles, kneeling on the porch, his life imploding. And then she understood. It wasn't just a secret. It was a conspiracy, a carefully orchestrated plan that had been years in the making. And she was right in the middle of it. But why? What did they want from her? And what was the real connection between her father and the Worthington family? Suddenly, the roses didn't seem so cruel anymore. They seemed menacing. And just like that, the game changed. It wasn't about a divorce anymore. It was about survival. Then, out of nowhere, the little boy broke free from his mother's grasp. He ran straight to Agnes, who was still sputtering with rage. He tugged on her skirt. "Grandma," he said, his voice clear and innocent. "Why are you being so mean to Mommy?" The air crackled. Sarah's jaw dropped. "Grandma?" Agnes went white as a sheet. She stared at the boy, her mouth working, but no sound coming out. This was beyond a secret. This was impossible. Charles lifted his head, confusion warring with the guilt in his eyes. The woman beside him gasped, pulling the boy back. "Ethan, no! Don't call her that!" But Ethan wasn't listening. He pointed a chubby finger at Agnes. "But Mommy said you're my grandma, Agnes. She showed me pictures." Sarah felt like she was watching a play, a bizarre, twisted drama unfolding right before her eyes. Agnes, this monster, was Ethan's grandmother? That meant it couldn't be. Agnes finally found her voice, a raspy whisper. He doesn't know what he's saying. He's just a child." But her eyes, her trembling hands, they betrayed her. Charles stood up slowly, his gaze fixed on his mother. Mom, what is going on? How could you? And then Agnes did something that no one, especially Sarah, could have predicted. She laughed. A high-pitched, hysterical laugh that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "Oh, Charles," she cackled, tears streaming down her face. "You really don't know, do you? You're just as clueless as your father was." She turned to Sarah, a cruel glint in her eyes. "You think your father was so noble, so righteous? He was a fool, a pawn in my game." Sarah took a step back, fear clutching at her throat. What are you talking about?" Agnes grinned, a truly terrifying sight. "Your father. Oh, he knew plenty. He knew about Charles here. He knew about Ethan. He even knew." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes gleaming with malice. "He knew that I was his sister." Silence descended again, heavier this time, suffocating. Sarah's mind went blank. Her father and Agnes? Siblings? The respected judge and this venomous woman? It was insane. "What?" Charles whispered, his voice barely audible. Agnes ignored him, her focus entirely on Sarah. "Your father and I, we had a little disagreement years ago about the family fortune. You see, he thought he was so much better than me, so much more deserving, so I made sure he paid the price. And now you're going to pay it too." She lunged forward, grabbing Sarah's arm with surprising strength. "You think you can just waltz in here, marry into our family, and take what's rightfully mine? Think again." Before anyone could react, Agnes shoved Sarah with all her might. Sarah stumbled, lost her balance, and tumbled off the porch. She landed hard on the unforgiving flagstones, a sharp pain exploding in her head. As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, she saw Agnes standing over her, a triumphant sneer on her face. Then everything went black. As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, she saw Agnes standing over her, a triumphant sneer on her face. Then everything went black. The first thing Sarah felt was cold, stone cold, and a pounding, like a drum solo in her head. Then the voices, muffled, distorted. "Call an ambulance, she's out cold." "That crazy woman, she needs to be locked up!" Slowly the world sharpened. She was lying on the flagstones, the summer sun suddenly too bright. Charles was kneeling beside her, his face etched with worry. Ethan and his mom were huddled together, looking terrified. And Agnes was being restrained by two burly guys in suits. Security, probably. "Sarah? Sarah, can you hear me?" Charles' voice was shaky. She blinked, trying to focus. Yeah, I hear you. What happened?" "You fell. Agnes, she pushed you." His voice was thick with anger. Sarah tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over her. "My head." Charles gently pushed her back down. "Just stay still. The ambulance is on its way." Then a new voice cut through the chaos. A voice Sarah knew. A voice she hadn't heard in years. "What in the blazes is going on here?" Everyone froze. It was him, standing at the edge of the porch, his Stetson casting a shadow over his face. Was John Harding, her dad. But that was impossible. Her dad was dead. He died 10 years ago from a heart attack. She'd seen the body. She'd planned the funeral. She'd scattered his ashes in the damn rose garden he loved so much. But there he was. Older, maybe, a little weathered, but definitely him. Sarah felt like she was trapped in a nightmare. Or maybe she was still unconscious, and this was just some messed up dream. "Dad?" she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "John." Harding's eyes landed on her, and for a moment, just a flicker, something that looked like guilt, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual stern expression. "Sarah, what the hell happened to you?" He pushed past Charles and knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her. "Dad, but you're dead." The words tumbled out, a jumbled mess of confusion and disbelief. He frowned, his brow furrowed. "Dead? What are you talking about, girl? I've been away, taking care of some business." Taking care of business? What kind of business keeps a man away for 10 years and fakes his own death? Then his gaze shifted to Agnes, who was still struggling against the security guards. His face hardened. "Agnes," he said, his voice dangerously low, "what have you done?" Agnes stopped struggling and stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. "John, you're alive." "Alive and kicking," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "And I'm here to put an end to this madness." He turned back to Sarah, his expression softening slightly. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm here now. I'll explain everything. Just try to stay calm." But calm was the last thing Sarah felt. Her head was spinning. Her dad was alive. Agnes knew. And what the hell was this business he'd been taking care of? As the paramedics arrived and started tending to her, Sarah looked from her dead father to the struggling Agnes, to Charles and the little boy, Ethan, whose life had just been turned upside down. One thing was clear. The game hadn't just changed. It had exploded, and she had a feeling things were about to get a whole lot worse. Why had he come back now? What secrets had he been hiding? And was her father any less of a monster than Agnes? The answers, she knew, were going to be far more twisted than she could ever imagine. As the paramedics arrived and started tending to her, Sarah looked from her dead father to the struggling Agnes, to Charles and the little boy, Ethan, whose life had just been turned upside down. One thing was clear. The game hadn't just changed. It had exploded. And she had a feeling things were about to get a whole lot worse. Why had he come back now? What secrets had he been hiding? And was her father any less of a monster than Agnes? The answers, she knew, were going to be far more twisted than she could ever imagine. They strapped her onto a gurney, a neck brace suddenly tight. Everything felt surreal. Like watching a movie about someone else's messed up life, John Harding walked beside the gurney, his hand gripping hers. "Just hold on, sweetheart. We'll get you fixed up." His touch, it felt familiar, yet alien. This man, her dad, was a stranger. A ghost come back to haunt her. They loaded her into the ambulance. Charles tried to follow, but John stopped him. "Stay here, Charles. Deal with this mess." His voice left no room for argument. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Sarah was alone with her, dead father and a whirlwind of questions. "Dad," she managed, her voice raspy. "What's going on? Where have you been?" He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's a long story, Sarah. A story you wouldn't believe." "Try me," she said, her eyes fixed on his. He hesitated, then started to speak, his voice low and grave. "It all started years ago, with your mother." Suddenly, the ambulance lurched to a stop. Not a gradual slowing, but a violent, screeching halt. "What the hell was that?" one of the paramedics yelled. Before anyone could react, the back doors of the ambulance burst open. A figure stood silhouetted against the bright sunlight, a gun glinting in their hand. "Sarah Harding," the figure said, their voice cold and metallic. "Come with me. Now." John Harding pushed himself in front of Sarah. His eyes narrowed. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. They simply raised the gun and fired. Not at John, at Sarah. The bullet ripped through her chest. Ah! Searing pain exploded. stealing her breath. Everything went blurry, then black. She heard John screaming her name, a primal roar of grief and rage. But then, even that faded away. She was dying. But who was this person, and why? Her father had secrets. Agnes had secrets. Charles also had too many to count. But there was someone behind them. Someone so horrible that they had sent an assassin to kill her. Then, as her vision faded out, she heard one last thing. "Don't worry, Sarah." The figure said, their voice now clear and familiar. "You won't feel a thing, Mom." Sarah's world dissolved into darkness. Her mom? Her mother? The figure was her brother. Her brother had just murdered her. Her mom? Her mother? The figure was her brother. Her brother had just murdered her. Or had he? Suddenly, she gasped, sucking in air. Rough, painful, but air. She wasn't dead. Not yet. The bullet? A graze. Right across her chest. Close. Too damn close. The metallic voice, though, that was burned into her brain. John was yelling, a string of curses that would make a sailor blush. The paramedics were scrambling, confused. "Get her to the hospital. Now!" John roared, his face a mask of fury. He turned back to the ambulance, scanning the shadows. But whoever had shot her was gone, vanished. As they sped towards the hospital, Sarah's thoughts raced. Her brother? She had no brother. Never had. Just her and Dad. Right? But what if everything she thought she knew was a lie? What if John had been keeping secrets from her entire life? And what was this business that had taken him away for a decade? At the hospital, chaos. Doctors shouting orders, nurses rushing around. They wheeled her into a room, hooked her up to machines. John hovered, a dark cloud over her bed. "Who was that, Dad?" she croaked, her voice weak. "Who shot me?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. I don't know, sweetheart. I swear, I don't." She stared at him, searching his face for the truth. But his expression was unreadable. Then the door burst open. A woman strode in, her face tight with anger. It was Evelyn, Charles Worthington's ex-wife, the icy blonde who had been suspiciously absent until now. "John Harding," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You miserable son of a bitch." John's face hardened. "Evelyn, what do you want?" "I want the truth," she hissed. "And I want it now." She turned to Sarah, her eyes blazing. "Your father, he's not who you think he is." "Is. I know that much," Sarah retorted, her voice laced with sarcasm. Evelyn ignored her. "John Harding is not your father. He's your brother." The room swam. Everything tilted again. Her brother? Her brother? And Charles is not your brother. He's your son. John lunged at Evelyn, grabbing her arm. "Shut your mouth, you crazy bitch." But Evelyn wrenched herself free. "It's true, Sarah. Ask him. He knows." Sarah stared at John, her mind reeling. He was her brother? And Charles, her son? It was insane. Impossible. But then a memory surfaced. A fleeting image of her mother, young and beautiful, whispering a secret in her ear. A secret she had buried deep, forgotten for years. "Charles, he's—" Sarah stammered, her voice trembling. Evelyn nodded, her eyes filled with pity. "He's your son, Sarah. John and Agnes, they covered it up. They sent you away, made you forget. But it's all coming back now, isn't it?" Sarah's world exploded. The Harmony Foundation, the divorce clause, Agnes's hatred. It all made sense now. But there was still one question, a burning question that consumed her. If John is my brother and Charles is my son, who is my father?
Evelyn smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "Oh, darling," she whispered, "that's the best part. Your father is Charles Worthington." "Oh, darling," she whispered, "that's the best part. Your father is Charles Worthington." The air in the hospital room thickened. I couldn't breathe. Charles, my Charles Worthington, the guy I'd met, the man who'd been kneeling on the porch, wrecked. He was my dad? John was yelling, but it was like his voice was underwater. Evelyn's face, smug. Like she just won the lottery and the prize was my shattered life. My head swam. I saw flashes, my childhood, David's knowing looks, Agnes's venom, the little boy calling Charles daddy. It was all twisted. A sick, messed up soap opera. And I was the star, but more like a puppet on a string. "That's impossible," I choked out, my voice a pathetic rasp. Evelyn just smiled, a chilling, empty smile. "Is it, Sarah? Think about it. The money, the power. The Worthingtons protect their own. And Charles, he always had a soft spot for you." John grabbed Evelyn, his grip tight enough to bruise. "Get out! Get the hell out of here!" He started dragging her toward the door. But Evelyn wasn't done. She dug her heels in, refusing to move. "The truth needs to come out, John. Sarah deserves to know." He shoved her into the hallway. The door slamming shut behind her. He turned back to me, his face pale, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, don't listen to her. She's crazy. She's trying to destroy us." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Is it true, John? Are you my brother? Is Charles my father?" He hesitated just for a second, but that was enough. I saw the truth in his eyes. He finally nodded, a slow, defeated movement. It's complicated, Sarah. A long story. A story that'll change everything. You think you know?" And then the door opened again. But this time it wasn't Evelyn. It was Charles. He stood there, his face ashen, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "It's true, Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm your father." But then something else happened, something that made my blood run cold. Behind Charles, in the doorway, stood Agnes. But she wasn't being restrained anymore. She was smiling, a slow, terrifying smile, and in her hand she held a gun. "It ends now," she said, her voice calm, almost serene. "The truth dies with you." She raised the gun, pointing it straight at Charles. But before she could pull the trigger, another figure stepped into the room. A figure I hadn't seen in years. My mother. But it couldn't be. My mother was dead. I'd seen her grave. But there she was, standing in the doorway, her eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. And in her hand, she held a gun. "Not today." "Agnes," she said, her voice like ice, "this ends here." And then everything went to hell. My mother? It couldn't be. My mother was dead. I'd seen her grave, her eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. And in her hand, she held a gun. "Not today, Agnes," she said, her voice like ice. "This ends here." And then everything went to hell. Agnes didn't hesitate. She fired, but instead of hitting Charles, the bullet slammed into Mom. Mom stumbled back, a look of shock on her face. She clutched her chest, her hand coming away covered in blood. "You bitch," Mom gasped, her voice weak. Agnes just laughed, a crazy, triumphant laugh. 2 birds with 1 stone. Perfect. Charles screamed, rushing toward Mom. John was right behind him, his face a mask of fury. I lay there, paralyzed, watching my world crumble around me. My dead mom, shot. Charles, my son, also my dad. John, my brother. And Agnes, the root of all evil. Then, out of nowhere,
Mom lunged. Despite being shot, she somehow found the strength to tackle Agnes. The two women went down in a heap, the guns skittering across the floor. Charles and John tried to pull them apart, but they were locked in a death grip. They grappled on the floor in a horrifying display of rage. Agnes howled. Suddenly, Agnes managed to get her hands on the gun again. She raised it, pointing it at Mom's head. "Say goodbye," she snarled. But then, something unexpected happened. Mom reached out and grabbed Agnes's hand, stopping her from pulling the trigger. Mom then did something shocking. She smiled. A real smile, full of love and tenderness. She looked at Agnes, into her eyes, and said, "I forgive you, sis." "Sis?" Agnes's jaw dropped. Her eyes went wide. It was like Mom's words were a punch to the gut. She stared at Mom. What did you say?" Agnes stuttered. "I know everything," Mom replied, still smiling. "About Charles, about Sarah, about Dad." Agnes began to tremble. She threw down the gun, the metal clattering to the floor. She started to cry. Actual tears ran down her face. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Agnes sobbed. It spiraled out of control." Mom reached out and took Agnes's hand. "It's okay," she said gently. "We're family. We'll get through this together." The room was silent. Charles and John stared at their mothers in disbelief. I lay there, still struggling to process everything I just heard. But then, the silence was broken by another voice. A voice I didn't recognize. "That's a touching scene," the voice said, dripping with sarcasm. "But it's time for the curtain call." A figure stepped into the doorway, tall, shadowy, holding a gun. But it wasn't just any figure. It was the man who had shot me earlier. The one I thought was my brother. But it wasn't him. Not really. It was David. David, my ex-husband. The guy I thought was just a pawn in the Worthingtons' game. But he was the conductor. He was a mastermind. And he had a secret that would change everything. "Surprised to see me, Sarah?" David asked, smiling. "I bet you're wondering why I'm doing this." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "Why, David? Why did you set all this up?" David let out a laugh and simply said, "It's all for the baby, your baby, the only one that actually matters." "Surprised to see me, Sarah?" David asked, smiling. "I bet you're wondering why I'm doing this." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "Why, David? Why did you set all this up?" David let out a laugh and simply said, "It's all for the baby, your baby, the only one that actually matters." "Baby? What baby?" My hand instinctively went to my stomach. Flat, normal. Had I been pregnant this whole time? Was that even possible? "What are you talking about, David? I'm not pregnant," I said, my voice shaking. His smile widened. "Oh, but you are, Sarah. You just don't know it yet." He took a step closer, his eyes fixated on my abdomen. "Remember that IVF treatment you did before our marriage crumbled?" I gasped. Of course. A faint memory resurfaced. I'd almost forgotten all about it. But that was years ago. "They're really good at keeping you sedated, it seems." "Oh well, all in due time, my love." David's voice dripped with insincerity. David smiled, a truly unsettling smile. "See, Sarah, I always knew you were special. You just needed a little push." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The Harmony Foundation. The divorce clause. Agnes's hatred. It was all about controlling me, about ensuring that his child, his heir, would be born into the Worthington family. But why? Why go to such elaborate lengths? Why, David? Why all this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He chuckled. Oh, Sarah, you really don't get it, do you? It's about power, about control, about ensuring that the Worthington legacy continues through my bloodline. He paused, his eyes gleaming with fanaticism. You see, Sarah, the Worthingtons may have the money, but I have the brains. And with our child, I'll have it all. He gestured to the hospital room, the chaos, the drama. This is just a little house cleaning. A few loose ends to tie up before we start our new life. Together. My mother, seeing what was about to happen, screamed for me to run, but the word had barely left her lips when I heard a deafening crack and saw that Agnes was now holding a gun, pointed directly at my mother. It was over. You really didn't let me finish what I had to say, and that's not very nice of you, he said nonchalantly. You will understand shortly, though. Agnes turned around, having overheard the comments, with a furious look in her eyes. What are you doing? We had a deal! Yes. Well, my plans have changed, he shrugged in response. After all, I didn't tell you all of the details, did I? All of a sudden, a strange sensation hit me, the strangest that I had ever felt. A weird heat started to wash over my body, and I began to have an uncontrollable urge to lunge at Agnes. It felt as if my whole body was on fire. Then it happened. The lights in the room flickered, and I began floating towards Agnes. I had no control over my body. I could not think. David began to smile with a gleam in his eye, and then shouted, That's my girl. My world went black. O quê? Tudo girava. David, pai do bebê? Mas como? E por que ele estava fazendo isso? De repente, senti uma força estranha me puxando. Não era física, era algo mais. Uma energia. Meus braços se estenderam. Meus olhos se fixaram em Agnes. Ela tremia, a arma caindo de sua mão. Não, Charles gritou. Mas era tarde demais. Um raio de luz branca saiu de mim, envolvendo Agnes. Ela gritou, um som horrível. E então, ela se foi, desintegrada, pó. O choque me atingiu. O que eu fiz? Que poder é esse dentro de mim? David sorriu. Um sorriso louco. Finalmente, o herdeiro despertou. Agora o poder será meu. Ele tentou se aproximar, mas algo o impediu. Uma barreira invisível. Minha mãe se levantou, fraca, mas viva. Não, David. Acabou. Ela ergueu a mão, e uma luz diferente, suave e dourada, emanou dela. A luz envolveu David, e seus olhos se arregalaram em terror. O que você está fazendo? Ele gritou. Minha mãe não respondeu, apenas sorriu. Um sorriso triste e compassivo. A luz ficou mais forte, e David desapareceu. Silêncio. O hospital sumiu. Estávamos em um campo, sob um céu estrelado. Charles, John, minha mãe, todos ali, olhando para mim. Você está bem? Charles perguntou, sua voz cheia de preocupação. Eu balancei a cabeça, confusa. O que aconteceu? Onde estamos? Minha mãe se aproximou, segurando minha mão. Você tem um poder, Sarah. Um poder que pode mudar o mundo, mas ainda precisa aprender a controlá-lo. E ali, sob as estrelas, começou minha nova jornada. Uma jornada de descoberta, de aprendizado, de aceitação. O pesadelo Worthington tinha terminado. Mas algo novo, algo maior, estava apenas começando. E eu não fazia ideia do que estava por vir. Você precisa se inscrever agora. Não perca as próximas histórias, ainda mais insanas. Esmague o botão de like já. Alimente o algoritmo e mostre seu apoio. Inunde os comentários com suas teorias e reações. Queremos saber tudo o que você achou. Compartilhe este vídeo agora mesmo com 5 amigos que precisam conhecer esse final. Só os verdadeiros fãs
entendem a importância dessas ações. Não espere nem mais um segundo. Demonstre seu apoio agora.